So as we know, right, Lanyon receives this letter, and he has been told that it is of capital importance, right? Capital importance, right? Of the most importance, right? And this idea of it being of capital importance, he says, even if you're called to the bedside of an emperor, because the thing is that he is aware, because Dr. Lanyon is a physician, he's an MD. It's possible he may get calls in the middle of the night. I mean, back in the day, right, hospitals were a fairly rare thing, and doctors had more offices than there were hospitals, and they would make house calls. It was not unusual for doctors to be called in the middle of the night. And so, what is important now, you would have had to be in someone's practice. They oftentimes wouldn't come for just anyone. And so he's saying, even if you're at the bedside of an emperor, right, this is more important. He says, my life and my reason are at stake, which is a very, very strange thing for him to be saying. And yet this is what he is saying to Lanyon. He says, save my, my troubles will be rolled away, of course, right? This idea of the stories being rolled away. One of the things that you will notice, I mean, this is obviously a reference either to the stone of Lazarus being rolled away or the stone of Christ's tomb being rolled away, right? We notice in Jekyll's writing as we encounter it that he has a very religious context, right? Earlier, Jekyll's referred to him in his letter to Utterson as chief of sinners and chief of sufferers, right? This idea of being chief of sinners, right? That's a quote from St. Paul, who referred to himself as the chief of sinners for having persecuted the church. And once again, we have this illusion of the stone being rolled away, right? There's this idea that throughout this text, Jekyll is making a lot of different religious references, which he did not do in his earlier conversations. We notice that there's this thing of religious imagery. This can be attributed partly just to the fact that at a time when the Western world was in Christendom and basically everyone had the same religion, that biblical references were very common. But the fact that they're using a lot of biblical references now, it does seem to be important. So, your friend H.J. Henry Jekyll. Now, interestingly enough, right, he doesn't give his full name. This is an interesting thing. So it is worthwhile to note that he doesn't actually sign his name. He just says H.J. And by saying H.J., right, the idea, because in a formal letter, why wouldn't you give your regular signature? This could just be an informality between friends. Or it could be simply one of those things where he's worried about should the letter be intercepted, right? That could be it as well. And someone could confer it's Henry Jekyll, but it would be a little harder to prove in terms of evidence. And then he has a PS, right? You'll notice like some letters have a PS, right? Some people say it means personal sentiment. It doesn't. It means postscript, right? It means after writing, right? After writing, right? So he has a PS at the bottom of the letter. PS. I had already sealed this up when a fresh terror struck upon my soul. It is possible that the post office may fail me, and this letter may not come into your hands until tomorrow morning. In that case, dear Lanyon, do my errand when it shall be most convenient for you in the course of the day, and once more expect my messenger at midnight. It may then already be too late, and if that night passes without event, you will know that you will have seen the last of Henry Jekyll. Right? And so, again, right, the reason why I brought up, right, you may have seen the last of Henry Jekyll, right, because just now in the writing he signed H.J., which seems a little weird, but then he gives his name away, right? One of the things that we notice in writing is there's generally a parody, right? Normally he would have used H.J. twice, or he would have written Henry Jekyll twice. So why the difference, right? It's noted because when people write letters to one another, one of the things that they say is that you should keep it the same either way. If you're going to say Henry Jekyll one time, you should say Henry Jekyll both times. Why not? Well, the idea is it seems that maybe he was being curt or mysterious in the first letter, but then when he wrote his postscript, it's apparent that maybe in his terror he forgot to be clandestine, right? But that lack of parody, that lack of writing parallel, does seem a little strange. All right, so and now we continue with Lanyon. Lanyon's note. So this is Lanyon. He shared Jekyll's note, and now he continues writing his account. Upon the reading of the letter, I made sure my colleague was insane. Now, made sure normally means to verify, but that just means he just believed, But till that was proved beyond the possibility of doubt, I felt bound to do as he requested. The less I understood of this farrago, wow, farrago, there's a term I haven't heard in a long time. Farrago, man, that's a strange word. Farrago, it means a mixture of confusion, right? It can also mean a messed up situation, right? But the idea is that it's confusing. It's all mixed together. It's weird. It's strange. It's hard to decipher. Anything that's a farrago, it's like it's kind of hard to understand. Like when one element of it ends and the other begins. That's the kind of man. That word's a blast from the past. All right. The less I understood of this farrago, the less I was in a position to judge of its importance. Meaning, the less he knew about it. Like, how is Dr. Lanyon able to judge the situation when, quite frankly, he has absolutely no clue what's going on? And what we see in this, when Dr. Lanyon doesn't know what's going on, we see that, like Utterson, he's being a vehicle for the reader, because Utterson hasn't really known what's going on either. So in Lanyon's narrative, right, the idea that, I can't explain any of this because I have no idea what's going on. There's all these different things that are going, this farrago, right? And in this sense, Dr. Lanyon is once again standing in place of the reader with this farrago of different clues and details, and none of it seems to be making any sense. The less I understood of this farrago, the less I was in a position to judge of its importance. An appeal so worded could not be set aside without a grave, serious responsibility. I rose accordingly from table, got into a hansom. Ooh, hansom, that's another word we don't hear too much. Hansom is that's another old-fashioned word. It refers to a covered two-person carriage, right? Generally like a little cab, like a little, but not a bigger, it's a small cab, a small horse and buggy cab. Got into a hansom and drove straight to Jekyll's house. So apparently he was the one driving. Or maybe he had someone driving, it's hard to say. The butler was awaiting my arrival. He had received by the same post as mine a registered letter of instructions, and had sent at once for a locksmith and a carpenter. Again, this idea of another registered letter is very strange. You don't normally you can just send a notice, or why not just do it himself? Very, very strange. The tradesman came while we were yet speaking. As we moved in a body to old Dr. Denman's surgical theater, in fact, that's the house behind Dr. Jekyll's house that's connected by the thing that he uses, incident of the door, that kind of thing. The door was very strong, the lock excellent. The carpenter avowed, that means he witnessed, right? He testified that he would have great trouble and have to do much damage if force were to be used, and the locksmith was near despair. But this last was a healthy, handy fellow, and after 2 hours' work, the door stood open. So, the door basically, right? Basically, the idea is the door is so strong, right? Like force is not a good idea, and the lock is so strong. It took the locksmith a long time. But just here's that word again, avowed, right? That means testified with the force of seriousness, right? Right. So like how if you avow something, that means you would be willing to say it. Like similarly, like so if you affirm and avow, right, that means that you say it with the force of an oath, basically. But they were able, after 2 long hours, are able to get this door open. The press marked E was unlocked, and I took out the drawer, had it filled up with straw and tied in a sheet, and returned with it to Cavendish Square. He has it filled up with straw basically because he doesn't want a lot of glass files, rambling around in there. So basically to make sure that all the contents remain secure, on the bumpy carriage, everything would not be damaged. Just like straw would be the equivalent of packing peanuts in this particular situation. Here I proceeded, so the President Mark E returned with it to Cavendish Square, his place where his doctor's office is, and also his residence, because, oftentimes professionals, like a doctor would often have their residence like above their office, so their in front of their house would be their office. Here I proceeded to examine its contents. The powders were neatly made up, but not with the nicety of the dispensing chemist, right? Nicety meaning not with the precision, not with the level of orderliness that one would expect. So clearly, even though the different powders are organized, it's not the chemicals are not the way they were when you would have first gotten them from the chemist. They're organized, but clearly, like the way they've been organized is not the way a chemist would organize them. It's not the way that they've been. The way they're packaged is not the way a chemist would package them. So it was plain they were of Jekyll's private manufacture, meaning Jekyll, private manufacturer, he made it himself. And when I opened one of the wrappers, I found what seemed to me a simple crystalline salt of a white color, so a white crystalline salt. The phial, to which next turned my attention, might have been about half full of a blood red liquor, meaning there's some kind of alcoholic content, which was highly pungent, pungent to the sense of smell, and seemed to me to contain phosphorus and some volatile ether. So here's some more terms, right? The term pungent, right, refers to a strong smell, right? And volatile in chemical terms. So if someone has a volatile temper, that means they can easily explode. In chemistry, it means it can easily evaporate or is chemically unstable, may easily explode as well. All right, so when it says it seems like it's a volatile, and he talks about it being some kind of volatile ether. Ether it's both a solvent, but it's a chemical, again, a very, very pungent chemical used for anesthesia. And so he is clearly these are volatile chemicals, and the idea of them being volatile chemicals makes all the more sense that he made sure he filled that drawer with straw, right? Like that's not that's not a thing you want rattling around that could easily be disturbed, right? So there are just some more terms for us. At the other ingredients, I could make no guess. The book was an ordinary version book and contained little but a series of dates, right? So when he uses this phrase, ordinary version book, right? What that basically just means is it's a book with blank pages. There was a time when people had to buy books, the most common books people would buy would be ordinary version books. See, people forget that not only did computers not exist for many, many centuries, but most people didn't even have personal typewriters. Records had to be kept manually, and they had to be kept in these bound books. And so people, so you might just call it like a journal, but it's more than just a typical journal, right? Because it has to be, has a lot of blank page. And so they're going to be used as things like ledgers, things for keeping track of inventory, etc. So it would be a very common thing for a doctor to have in order to keep track of various kinds of information. The book was an ordinary version book and contained little but a series of dates. These covered a period of many years, but I observed that the entries ceased nearly a year ago and quite abruptly. Here and there a brief remark was appended, that means it was appended, to a date, usually no more than a single word, double occurring perhaps six times in a total of several hundred entries, and once very early in the list and followed by several marks of exclamation, total failure. All this, though it whetted my curiosity, told me little that was definite. So here's another phrase, whetted my curiosity, right? Whetted, right? The easiest way to understand the word whetted simply means sharpened, right? Or heightened, right? When you sharpen a blade, right, the tool that you use to sharpen a blade, if you didn't know this, is actually called a whetstone. So anything that sharpens a curiosity or heightens a curiosity or makes it more intense, right? That's a whetted appetite means an intensified appetite. So right now we're at 14:50. So let me end this recording and start the new one.